You're tuned into the Growth Ceilings Podcast, the show for builders, dreamers, and leaders ready to break limits and grow beyond what they thought possible.
Welcome to the Growth Ceilings Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Lovelady, professional EOS implementer. EOS is the entrepreneurial operating system. This show is about real conversations with leaders who bring clarity to complex challenges and help organizations operate with confidence. Today, I'm joined by Brent LaLonde. Brent is a global operations and supply chain executive who has led sourcing, procurement, and operational transformation across complex organizations. His work focuses on simplifying global complexity while building strong teams and durable systems. And Brent, like myself, is a native of Michigan. Brent, welcome to the Growth Ceilings Podcast.
Good morning, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic to see you again. Brent, why don't you talk about your company, Mechanical Power, and your role as president, and what's brought you to this point?
Sure. So Mechanical Power, we're in over 50 years of operation, small privately owned company located in the suburbs of Chicagoland, which I believe you're familiar with, and you've moved on to greener pastures, so kudos to you for that. So Mechanical Power, value-add distributor, hybrid manufacturer, I refer to us as. We source mechanical components from all over the world for both OE and distribution customers. Again, been around a long time. Mechanical Power used to be a supplier to me when I worked at a much larger organization. So I've been at the company for 7 years, but I've been familiar with it and managed it from the outside for, going back to 2007, 2008. So very eerie twist of events when 7 years ago I was afforded the opportunity randomly to come and take the company into the future. Ownership was getting elderly. I think they recognized that they needed some young blood to come in and help the company forge ahead. And I was in a very, again, eerie twist of fate. I was the guy they brought in to do that, having managed the company as a supplier. I've really enjoyed it. A little bit of background before that. So grew up in Michigan, Metro Detroit, automotive family, went to Michigan State, studied supply chain management. I'm one of the few people that does what I studied in university. And I've done this throughout my career. And as a result, I'm bald and probably a little bit older than I should be at this point in time. But I started my career on the West Coast with a much larger organization or corporation, which is a very renowned company in terms of operational excellence. So I, still to this day, I look back to that experience and the subsequent experiences I had after that. Again, bigger companies, but each step I've taken, I've kind of moved to a smaller company and gravitated more towards private as opposed to public, which has been a fun journey for me. The stop I had before Mechanical Power, very similar company, 2 hours, but larger. And I really enjoyed that experience because, at larger organizations, you put so much time and effort into your job, and it can take months or years to see the effects of your efforts. And I love analogies, and the analogy I've always used, for this concept is when I turn up the volume on the radio, I want to hear the music go up now. I don't want to hear it go up in 9 months or a year or 15 months. So at that stop, the effects of what I was doing and what I got the team to do were immediate. And for me, that's very gratifying. So I've really enjoyed working at smaller private companies, applying the principles I was lucky enough to learn at the larger organizations and see the benefits of that for a small to mid-cap company. And that's what we're continuing to do at Mechanical Power at this time.
Fantastic, and thank you for that. Let's dig into your operations background. So what separates resilient operations from reactive ones?
Well, I think one critical thing is defining what success looks like in any operation. What does good look like? What are the measures of success? I've tried to move away from corporate terminology as I get older, but let's use the word key performance indicator, KPIs.
Yes.
Hopefully we don't go through too many acronyms here today, but KPIs, measures of success, what does good look like, correlate to a resilient operation. A reactive organization doesn't know what good looks like. Leadership doesn't necessarily know. And if they do know, they haven't effectively conveyed that to their supporting team, their cross-functional team, their stakeholders, both internally and externally. So I think that's kind of a broad brush statement to answer your question, but that's what I would point to first is, what are we trying to do here? What does good look like? And if you know what that is, it's properly communicated, and you have any semblance of supporting process, cadence to support it, that's resilient as opposed to being reactive.
Great takeaway. Reactive organizations don't know what good looks like. And you're your statement about defining what good looks like is so important. Having a plan around that, having a vision, how we're going to map towards that objective and where we're going to land. Excellent answer. Thank you. So, from your perspective, where do leaders most often overcomplicate supply chain decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some leaders struggle with brevity. I think some leaders struggle with the ability to quickly make informed decisions. One key thing I would point out is data is crucial. Data drives good decision making. So that's one thing, I learned early in my career and really became pivotal for me is, yeah, I have opinions, I have feelings, I have hunches, but I want to make data-driven decisions. And that data ironically correlates back to the first question you asked to measures of success. What data do we need to identify how we're doing, what we need to do, and how can we use that data, improve that data, ensure the integrity of that data in order to make good decisions and make good things happen for the company and for the people that work for it. Most importantly, the customers of whatever kind of company that is. So I didn't go a direction I thought I would go with that question, but that's what comes to mind is data-driven decision making.
Love it. What reminds me of, and I'm relating this to EOS, we talk about building a scorecard and be able to use data to make data-based driven decisions, taking the emotion, the ambiguity out of our decision making. Better yet, using data, using our scorecard, both for short-term and long-term predictability. Nothing worse than getting into an end of quarter, end of some timeline, end of year, and looking back and going, what happened? Why did we hit this? Why did we do that? And using your data to have a forward view of your business is where oftentimes the difference between success and failure. So excellent.
Yeah, and just real quick, Jim, you just made a key point. I think in life in general, but especially in business, taking the emotion out of it is very important, particularly from a leadership perspective. But data does that for you. Numbers don't lie. People in sports say the ball doesn't lie, right? And the same thing is true in business. So the more a business can be data driven and data can be used to take the emotion out of it, and everybody can just be vulnerable to that and accepting of the data showing how we're doing and where we need to go and how we need to get there, that's a sign of a good company.
Yeah, I'll take a step further. What you just said is that it creates accountability. Your operations, on sales, we have finance. We come together on a leadership meeting each week. We should be able to view our data, look at our scorecard, understand are we on track or off track, and if we're off track, we want to identify what are the core or root causes of being off track. Do we need more time, more resources? Is somebody holding up a process step? Where do we need the help so that we can be on track and be able to have course correction along the way, not way after the whole quarter, year, or whatever has been completed.
Yeah.
Again, another EOS tool that I'm bringing up here. So let's move to another question here. How do cost, quality, and delivery stay aligned under pressure?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Going back to my experiences, Danaher, Rexnord, and their operating systems are a derivative of GE, Jack Welch. They all kind of do the same thing. Companies, Danaher, Rexnord, Eaton Corporation, big companies, all of us in manufacturing have heard of before. So the whole thing is based on quality, delivery, and cost, QDC. And a lot of people like to look at what's first, what's the biggest priority, what's most important. And tying that into supply chain management, which, we're a supply chain management company, I've always loved asking people, particularly college students, what is your definition of supply chain management? And the variety of answers you get is truly unbelievable. The way I've always defined it is continuity of quality supply. Number one rule of supply chain management is continuity of supply, but if it's not quality supply, you're dead in the water. Okay. So using our business as an example, we're bringing product in from all over the world, China, India, Taiwan, primarily. You're looking at production or manufacturing lead times of roughly 90 days, then 30 to 40 days transit time to get it here. So you're looking at, a third of the year essentially from cradle to grave to get the product. If that product gets here and it's not good, we've lost, 33% of the year and we have product that we can't sell. So for me, it's quality number one, on-time delivery number two, and then obviously cost competitiveness to ensure an effective supply chain. So, I forget the way you worded the question, but that's the order. and the supporting processes and commitment of the team need to be devoted to that. And it's tricky. It's been really tricky the last 12 months with what's been going on geopolitically. And obviously COVID, is something that made supply chain management a household term. 20 years ago, people didn't know what that was, and it wasn't all that important within businesses. Now, arguably, I think everyone understands that's the most pivotal function within a business. It touches everything. And behind that is quality, delivery, and cost.
So let's talk about organizational design and the role that that plays in operational performance.
Well, it's critical. I hate to relate to sports too much, but you can have the best plan in the world if you don't have the right men or women going onto the field to execute that plan, you got a problem. So it's the same thing in business. You got to have the right people in the right places. Depending on what the business does, determine what the appropriate cross-functional design team looks like. Behind that is, again, data, what kinds of reports, what kinds of meetings, what's the right atmosphere for that. I've been in situations where out of a 50 or 60 hour work week, I'm in meetings for 80 to 90% of that. And then I'm trying to do my actual job in the remainder. So one thing I've really enjoyed at these smaller companies is just taking a little sliver of all that stuff I learned and was tattooed into my brain and on my forehead. You take 20, 25% of that and apply it to a smaller company, EOS light, I call it, or policy deployment light, I call it. Dramatic effect on smaller companies, and people buy in, they see the progress, you celebrate the wins, you build on that, you take an honest look at the losses, root causes, which you brought up earlier. How do we prevent that from happening again? And you move forward stronger. So I think I drifted a little bit from your question, but all that stuff ties together very nicely.
Oh, no, you're doing great. And I want to tap into what you just said. You're saying that as president of your business, you're spending 80% of your time, 4 days out of 5 days a week, sitting in meetings. Of those meetings that you're sitting in, are those all internal meetings? Or how would you break that out between internal and perhaps external meetings?
Yeah. So to clarify, those days for me are long gone. Spending spending that much time in meetings. So the last two stops at the smaller companies, including Mechanical Power, we have very few meetings. We have a couple weekly meetings. I try to keep them to 30 minutes or less. And so those days are in my rearview mirror, and that's where I want to keep them.
If you just quantify, we're going to take a stab at this on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being poor, 10 being outstanding. Give yourself a rating on the effectiveness of your meetings.
Well, ours today, I would say we'd be in that upper quartile of 1 to 10, 7 to 10, somewhere in there. You got to ask yourself, well, first of all, I've talked to a lot of people throughout my career about this. If we don't know why we're going to a meeting, and if everyone who's invited to that meeting doesn't understand their role in that meeting, you got a problem. Right? Why are we here? And it's been amazing to me throughout my career how many people don't even have that much established before they set up a meeting or go into it. So I like having clearly defined objectives for the meeting, roles and responsibilities of each person in there, engagement from everybody, leave the ego at the door. We're in here to solve problems and get better. So after the meeting, and you can read the room during the meeting to see if it's effective or not. But I like to conclude every meeting by, well, let's go back to the beginning. When you start the meeting, here's what we're going to talk about. You talk about it. And then at the end, what did we just talk about? What does everyone need to do? Are we on the same page? Are there any questions? Are there any concerns? Air it out, and again, leaving the ego at the door. And it doesn't matter who's got what title. We're all in this together. Let's fix something. And at the end, I think you can all easily say, did we fix something or not? Or did we get better? Or did we accomplish anything? So we're doing pretty well with that. And, I've killed a lot of meetings over the years that just weren't effective and let people go and do their jobs.
So here comes the 30-second commercial. I'm going to show the book Traction. This is written by Gino Wickman. You and I have a mutual connection with Gino. Gino is the author of Traction and really the brainchild behind EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And when you're talking about the effectiveness of meetings, and you just kind of laid out there, you talked about the job of the leadership team solving problems. And this is something that I emphasize in all that I teach with EOS. We call our meeting agenda a level 10 meeting. Level 10 is that we want to get from 7 to 10. We want our meetings to be great. So we have a very firm agenda, primarily focused on identifying, discussing, and solving issues. So we teach this process, this foundational tool, and we do a step called IDS: identify, discuss, and solve. And it sounds like you're doing much of that right now with your team, and what your experience has brought you to this point. So outstanding work.
Yeah, just a quick conclusion on that. So I'll kind of run you through what we're doing at Mechanical Power today. So I have a weekly staff meeting with the leadership team, and we hit the same things every single week. I throw everything out to them to digest beforehand. We have what we call a weekly flash, an operations flash. It has critical KPIs for the business. It tracks how we're doing throughout the month. If something is off, we dig into that a little bit further. If something is on or we're favorable to where we want to be, we pat ourselves on the back, celebrate it a little bit. We talk about why or how is that happening and how do we do more of that? So we hit that every week. New stuff comes into the business every week. So any fires or major priorities, we talk about those, talk about personnel, and we go around the room. It could be the best joke of the day from somebody, or, hey, I had this great experience with my family this weekend, or it could be an important business matter. But we keep that under 30 minutes. And my goal is, for everyone to walk out feeling informed. We do have a parent company now as of a year and a half ago for the first time in 50 years of existence. So we're answering to a different power. So I communicate anything from that. But I want people walking out feeling good, feeling informed, and understanding, how we're doing as a business, what their role in that is, anything they need to convey to their subordinates, and onward we go.
Let's stay with that theme for a moment. From your perspective, what leadership habits translate across global teams?
Well, the first word that comes to mind is consistency. If you're all over the map every day, every week, every month, your results are going to be all over the map. Consistency and diligence and discipline is super important, particularly for a global organization. So that, if you want brevity-oriented response, that's where I would leave it, is consistency and diligence and discipline. And the other thing, just, layman's terms, is doing what you say you're going to do, coming through, holding yourself accountable, leading by example. That really translates to other people quickly if you consistently do that. So, as I've grown throughout my career, I've seen the power of that. And every day I try to do that more in my personal life and my professional life.
How do strong operators prevent burnout while maintaining performance?
Yeah, good question. Well, for me, I saw firsthand for a long time what burnout looks like. I experienced it myself at those bigger companies. Granted, I was younger, life was simpler. I'm, not married, no children. But, even then, a 60, 70-hour work week can burn you out a little bit,
Sure.
particularly, and I think this is a really key point, particularly if you're not seeing the results that you want to see. So, I've seen burnout above me, at my level personally and below me. So I kind of learned through going through it firsthand, why is that happening to people? What made me feel this way? And, as I got into leadership positions, how can I apply those learnings to not provoke more burnout for myself and for the people that I'm working with? But, balance. Balance is a word that comes to mind. Work-life balance is important. I think that's really emerged as an important topic for people in business. COVID changed things a lot with working remotely, and now work-life balance is much more talked about. Those are things that I would look at, and I frankly have probably gone too far with flexibility for employees and unlimited PTO and stuff like that. But when you give people, a big field to roam in and you demonstrate that you trust them, the results can enhance from that. And people are happier, people are more content. They feel like they're checking all the boxes they need to check with their wives, their husbands, and their kids and their families and themselves. I think wellness, wow, it's an important thing. You got to be right in the head, right in the heart, and right physically to do your best at work. And if you're burning people out, that they're not going to have that. So it's a sensitive topic for me. I've seen it throughout my career, and I think have made some pretty good adjustments to help folks out in that regard.
You and I could probably tell all sorts of stories related to burnout. Give me your perspective on this, because something you said triggered this in my mind. Does burnout equal failure?
No, I would say burnout equals learning. If you're burned out, symptoms of that could be many things, but, failing in terms as it relates to what good looks like, sure, that can happen. But I think for those willing to look in the mirror and really discern, how did I get burned out, or how did we get burned out as a team or a company, learn from it, and again, prevent reoccurrence. I think it can be used as a good thing. This didn't work out for whatever reason. Let's figure that reason out. Let's learn from it, and let's apply those learnings going forward to become a better unit.
As I listen to you speak and what you're sharing your thoughts, I translate burnout. I think of the internal thought process, the little voice in my head. I'm burned out. I'm feeling these things that are making me feel burned out, right? Where I think I have failed, or perhaps people can relate to this, is when you are burned out, you're not at your best. Can we agree on that? If you're burned out, you're not at your best. What's the impact that's having on those around you? Your coworkers, your subordinates, the people you work for. If you're burned out, you're not at your best, right? So what is that effect in and around you? And having that awareness is so important.
Yeah, it really is. And that strikes a chord with me. I've been through a fair bit here the last few years on the personal side of things. And, most definitely that's impacted my aura and just my overall presence at work, and weathered that storm for the most part. But, I've really learned what that does to the folks around me, my team. Fortunately, I'm still here and made it through it, and, got a lot of support from my folks personally and professionally, and we're all better from it. But yeah, particularly in a leadership position, if you're not exhibiting what you want others to show, it doesn't work out. And that's something all leaders need to be cognizant of. Is you're on stage a lot. People, whether you know it or not, they're watching you. They naturally gravitate towards how you're feeling and how you're acting, how you're talking, your confidence levels, your optimism, your pessimism, all that stuff. So that's a really important topic, and it's on a human level. It's not just about business.
You know what? You just gave me a thought. I'm going to invite you to a future podcast, and we'll delve a little deeper into that. What do you think?
That sounds great.
Couple more questions for you. So what early warning signs tell you an operation is drifting off course?
Well, the measures of success are off. So in our case, again, weekly, we look at an operations flash, the key indicators of how we're doing throughout the month, and also year to date. We have what we call a bowler that has all of kind of the key things that we're measuring, a lot of finance related sales, purchasing, cost savings, on-time delivery to customers, inventory levels, etc. So every week, every month, every quarter, we're looking at that stuff, and things are either green, they're yellow, or they're red. Green is you're at or favorable to budget or plan. Red is you're below or unfavorable, and yellow is you're in the neighborhood. So those are our indicator, and we see them every single week as a team. So that's the most basic answer I'd give you. And obviously you got to go deeper where you're really losing and understanding why, but we're fortunate to have that process and that cadence in place. So we know right now, and I learned this from many good mentors and leaders I had, we know in real time if we're doing okay or we're not doing okay. I don't want to make it seem like we're laying in a hospital bed with stuff hooked up to us and beepers are going off if
Right.
the heart rate goes off. But in essence, it is kind of the equivalent of that in business if you have the right systems in place.
So I'll get you out of here on this question. What advice would you give a CEO overwhelmed by operational complexity?
Yeah. I think feedback from your team's important. I think, as much as people want to, let's take Kurt Signetti the other night, who won a first national championship for Indiana, which I'm still blown away by, and I'm truly inspired by it. I think it's outstanding. But there's a great example of a really good leader who came in and just completely changed a culture, very discipline oriented, very basic, very objective oriented. But I imagine as much as we hear him say great one-liners, Kurt sits back and he listens to the people around him. He listens to the team. He listens to the university. He listens to recruits. I think one thing I've valued more and more as I've gotten older is listening. So, we can dole out all the stuff we want to as leaders, and some people do too much of that. I think the more we listen to voice a customer, number one, for any business who's selling a product, what is the voice of customer? What are the voice of internal customers? We all have those. What's the voice of employees? And, actively listening and listening to understand and not to reply is really important too. So I'm drifting down a whole nother tunnel, but back to your question, I think you need to listen to those around you to get their feedback and then put all that together to understand why something has become overly complex and then fix it. And if you can't fix it, you got to get the help from others who can help you fix it and move forward. So I could go on, but I'll leave it there for now on that one.
Great job, Brent. This has been a fantastic conversation. You've shown how clarity, discipline, and strong systems help organizations perform under pressure. Your experience gives leaders a grounded way to simplify complexity without sacrificing results. For listeners who want to learn more, you can connect with Brent on LinkedIn and follow his work in operations and supply chain leadership. Thank you for joining me today, and thanks to everyone for listening and for being a part of the Grow Ceilings community. Until next time, keep growing, keep leading, and keep breaking through. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Jim.
You've been watching the Growth Ceilings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ready to grow.